Okay.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Alice Rosemary. I was named after my Polish grandmother, and she was Alexandra, but when she came to this country, everybody called her Alice, so that's how my name came. Anyway, I grew up. The first memory I have was at 3 years old in Pennsylvania, where we lived outside of Pittsburgh, and it was just sitting in the kitchen, in the living room on a hassock, because my parents were running around like crazy, battening down the hatches because there was supposed to be a big storm, summer storm. And I remember just feeling so secure and so safe in my family. I was the youngest of 3 kids. And I was probably about 3 years old because I remember my little green sweater with snaps on it. I loved that little sweater. And then at 7 years old, my dad and Mom were in the kitchen, and my dad slapped my mom across the face, and I happened to be in the dining room, and I said, "Stop, no." I'd never seen that happen before. And from that point on, I felt responsible for my parents. And my dad looked at me and glared at me, and then he started talking to my mother. So I had this unrealistic belief that I had to intervene to keep them from harming one another. And I went on with that belief, and I learned how to play God at a very young age. At 7 years old, I began to feel overly responsible for people in my family, and it kind of reached out into all parts of my life. And the domestic violence did go on, and my dad was very perfectionistic and went in and out of moods, I'd say, call it. And he was a rageaholic, and he did abuse all of us. And we were all became afraid of him because my mom was afraid of him. And she told me a story when she first got married. They were living in a house, in an apartment in a house, and she'd run down to the coal cellar in the house to hide when he got home from work because she didn't know what he was going to do. So I guess it went on before I was ever born, because they were living there when they were first married, or one of the first houses in Pennsylvania. They did move back to Queens. My dad was from Brooklyn, and after World War II, they both met on the train after being in service in World War II. My dad was stationed in the Aleutians as a pilot, and my mother was stationed as a Navy nurse in Idaho. And they were on the train, and that's how they met. And my dad was really in a big hurry to get married. And so probably my mom didn't really know much about him at all. But they got married and had 3 kids. And I was the last. And, they had one pregnancy, stillbirth. But anyway, that was what I grew up in. And I ran everywhere, as my neighbor testified. We lived on a hill called Polish Hill. There were all nationalities. My mother was the only Polish person I knew on that hill. But all kinds of people. I just thought it was a heavenly place to live. I thought it was perfect. And every Sunday we were raised in Catholicism. My mother was Polish Catholic, and she had 11 kids in her family, and they all lived in the Pittsburgh area, and except one. And every Sunday they'd get together and they'd make a traditional Polish meal, and it was great. My dad was always happy when we went there, and I was so grateful to have that normalcy in the family of all those relatives just being kind to one another and generous and laughing and having a good time every Sunday. And my dad converted to Catholicism to marry my mom. His dad started a Lutheran church in Long Island when he and his dad and grandfather were all from Brooklyn, but my grandpa bought land in Long Island, and he built a house there in 1948. So that's where I grew up visiting my grandfather in the 50s. And early 60s. Well, then he moved to Florida to retire. But I didn't hear till many years later that from a cousin who lived in Long Island, so he grew up with my grandpa, our grandpa. And he said, yeah, Grandpa used to have me run out to the cooler in the garage for beers, and then he'd get real mean. And I thought, oh, okay. Because I remembered my mom had said he was very abusive. I forget in what part of my life she told me, but it seemed like it might have been in grade school even when I was up to 11. Then we moved to Michigan. We lived outside of Detroit. And my dad got worse over the years, and ultimately he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 60 when he retired. And I felt really sorry for him, that horrible disease. And but anyway, I had a lot of resentment and bitterness towards my parents. And at the age of 16, I rebelled. I started lying to them because I wanted to do things. They were very strict, very, very strict. And so at that point, it was like the slide to hell in my life from the age of 16. Once I opened that door to the enemy of lying to my parents, then it just went from one thing to another. I mean, it was 1968 when I graduated, and I had premarital sex. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I knew I couldn't handle drugs because I was highly sensitive to drugs growing up. And I'd been diagnosed at 16 with extreme allergies, like 85% of environmental allergies. But I never was tested for food. But anyway, by the age of 30, I had been married and divorced, threw that marriage away, 3.5 years. And then I met my second husband and married him at the age of 30. And we decided to go to Alaska as soon as we were married. Had gone up there to visit, and he really wanted to live there. So on the way after we got married, by the way, my first husband got me into transcendental meditation, and that's how I met my second husband. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically Hinduism, but they don't tell you that in the introductory lecture. But after practicing it for 6.5 years, I was doing yoga and pranayama, breathing, and reading the Rig Veda sacred book, and listening to Samaveda sung. Wisdom is what that means. Doing all these things, Patanjali sutras. So I was quite immersed in New Age and occultic practices. I was attracted to all those things and all the wrong things. So by the age of 30, on the way to Alaska, my husband became very controlling on the 2-week trip from L.A. to Iowa, where we got married, and then to Idaho, when we spent a night at a motel. And I just lost it, and I got angry, and I said, why are you so controlling? And he just withdrew. From that point on, he never said anything, and I apologized many times. We got to Alaska, and I said to the air at the age of 30, 1980, in the town where we lived, out on this gorgeous land across from a year-round, I can't think of the name, but icy structure all year round, and Katchmack Bay was gorgeous. And I just said, who have I married? What have I married? I started thinking I made a big mistake at 2 weeks, and I should get a divorce. And this voice said, you're the common denominator, Alice. And I didn't know who the voice was. I was just standing outside by myself. But I knew that the voice was right. And I thought, yeah, I better start looking at myself. And it was within a very short time, God did one thing after another. And I went to a prayer meeting in that town with my friend, who we were living on her farm, breeding her Morgan horses, and she was going through a horrible divorce from her husband. She was having a nervous breakdown, and her sister came by. She had 6 siblings, and the sister that came by was a believer, And she said, stop, because we were having a fight. And she said, why don't you come to my prayer meeting with me? So we went to this little prayer meeting that women had in the upstairs of a building. I don't really know where we were. And this woman that led the prayer meeting started talking about all this demonic activity in town, things that were going on. I never heard these terms before. And then she just was describing these demonic experiences, and they were just like the experiences I had and other TMers had. We went to lots of retreats, always promised something more, which we got, which was more and more Hinduism. And I thought, that's demonic, all those experiences. I remember Maharishi Mahesh Yogi saying on his tapes, oh, that's just unstressing. That's just unstressing. And anyway, the woman, at the end of it, she asked me and my friend if we would like to be, I don't even know how she put it, but it was basically being born again. And I don't remember what word she said, nothing. But I knew that I was desperate, and I was always getting into everything in the New Age anyway, so why not try this? I didn't distinguish any difference. And so we both became born again at that moment. And then right after that, I couldn't stand to do TM any longer. I woke up one morning, and my first thought was, oh, I want to go out and see if the mayor is having her full. And then my second thought was, oh, I'll do my TM program first. And it took 2 hours, morning and evening, to do all those things I mentioned. And so I went out in 2 hours, and there was the foal standing there, still wet. And I was so angry because they're only wet for the first couple hours. So it's like that first voice was telling me, go out there now, right on time. And the second voice, I didn't find out till later. This was typical, that the Lord would speak to me first, and then the second voice was always the enemy trying to distract me from what the Lord was saying. And I just got so angry. I said, this isn't real life. That was it. Never practiced TM again for 6.5 years. I couldn't stand it, but my husband was still doing it, my second husband, and I just didn't want him to, and I'm sure I just bothered him. I don't know how I did it, but I'm sure I said things, did all the wrong things. But he finally gave it up. But unfortunately, within 6 months, he started smoking dope again, which he had done when he was 14 years old. So he just went right back to that. And years later, I thought, well, really, TM is like smoking dope, or taking drugs. Anyway, but then the first 5 years of our marriage, I got pregnant within 3 months after getting married for the first time in my life. And we had our first child. And those first 5 years were horrible. And so I guess I'll switch here to talking. I'll try to do it all together. But I'll bring that up in the last part, I guess. But my food struggles, I didn't even understand anything. I was highly addicted to sugar. I just ate horribly. I'd deprive myself of real food so I could go get some elaborate ice cream, double ice cream for dessert or whatever, just really bad eating. And I was incredibly sick my first pregnancy. And then I did get pregnant with our second. Well, I got pregnant with the second. I had ectopic pregnancy, and that was probably caused by my having a Delcon shield, which was put in by Planned Parenthood back in the days when I was immoral. And they did say they took it off the market because it was found to harm whatever in your uterus, and then you would be scarred for life. And that's what the doctor said when I had the ectopic pregnancy a year after my first pregnancy. so I didn't have that baby, and I had my tube tied, just one tube, and miraculously, my husband did come to the Lord 5 years into our marriage because a friend of mine, Kathy, came from Australia to visit. Her husband was he was being unfaithful, and the Lord told her, go back to your parents, your mother. Her father was no longer alive, but go back to your mother in Oregon for 6 months. Take all 4 of your kids, and her kids were 13 months to 9 years old. And she gave this book to my husband called Death of a Guru, and that's how he came to the Lord. And that was 5 years into the marriage, and I can't tell you how joyous I was that he came to the Lord and we started going to church. It just felt like I had new life. I had a whole new, brand new life. In the first 5 years, it didn't matter that it was horrible and just really, really, really hard. The hardest part was knowing that my son went through that, my firstborn. But I just felt so thrilled to be in the Lord and with my husband. And I went and accepted the Lord again right away after he had gone by himself to this church. He read that book and he was convinced, because it's all about Hinduism and all that. It's really a good book. So my food struggles really came to a height after I had my second child and I was breastfeeding. So she was born 7 years into the marriage. And my food was just hideous. Like I said, I'd eat horribly just to eat what I liked, never thinking anything of it. I was raised on tremendous amounts of sugar. It was just part of our culture. And then but my body was breaking down, and I just, and they were trying to test me for food allergies. And what happened was, the 7th year of our marriage, an acquaintance really said, why don't you if you're having trouble with sugar, go to Dr. Helen in Hollywood. She'll help you. And Dr. Helen said, you got to get off sugar, wheat, and dairy. And you're so hyperglycemic, you can't eat fruit except for melon for 6 months. And I thought she was crazy, but I had the gift of desperation. So I quit eating wheat and dairy right away. And then I couldn't believe how wonderful I felt just taking those out. And that was God who helped me then. But the sugar was a heavy-duty addiction. It took me longer. And one day I went into Dr. Helen's office, and she took my vital signs. She said, Alice, are you sure you're not eating sugar? And I said, no, I'm not. And then she was working on my mouth because she was a dentist, and I ended up going to her for dentistry, too. And and I thought, I am eating poppy seed hamantaschen, but it's mostly poppy seeds and raisins. There's not really sugar in it. So after she took her hands out of my mouth, I said, well, I am eating a poppy seed hamantaschen every day. I love them, and I go to the bakery and get them. Get one every day. She put her face real close to me, and she said, Alice, if you don't quit eating those, you will die. And I felt like, oh my God, I'm just like an alcoholic with sugar. I'm totally in denial that of course there must be sugar in it. And they even had pastry, which was crazy because I gave up wheat, and dairy. Anyway, how do I use the Bible in your recovery? That began my real recovery, and I had the help of doctors for years until 2004 when I was 54, and I had a resentment about the way I was eating, and I thought I better go to OA. They say, go to program if you have a difficulty with something, and I had a resentment. I thought, that'll take some, and that was life-changing. But I got the Bible for Food about 10 years ago through Stephanie Whiting. And I'm just so grateful for Bible for Food. Everything, what God also did in that 7th year of my marriage, when 1987, He took me to the adult child program, adult child in dysfunctional families, and Codependence Anonymous the first year, and the second year, incest survivors. And I worked those 3 programs, and I had a reading. By that time, I'd been reading the Bible for a few years through every year. That's what they told me to do. And the story of Joseph made a huge difference in my life. I thought, that's my story. And Joseph said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And I shared at a meeting, and all these people came up very respectfully to shake my hand. I even counted, and there were 40 people. I just was amazed that they wanted, and I had written a couple letters, like 10 steps to my dad, never to send them, just try to work through my problems. As soon as I did that, the Lord just immediately brought that scripture to mind. They meant it, for evil, but God meant it for good. And I knew from that point on, and I was about, how old was I? I want to say 39. I was about 39 then. And from that point on, I knew that God would use everything that had happened in my life for good, and that I'd be telling you and other people that story of how God totally took all resentment, all bitterness, all everything out of my body, mind, spirit, emotions. It was just like I was given a forgiving spirit. I was given love, unconditional love. I just became what God intended me to be all my life up till then. And I was just a grateful person. And I still use the Bible constantly in my life. God also brought Madeline Goldberg into my life at that 7th year of my marriage. And she discipled me, and she and her husband work for Chosen People Ministries, so there was an emphasis on reaching out to Jews, and just a different emphasis, but basically it was good. And Dan always counseled my husband and I. We always had marriage problems, etc. And there's more to my story, but I'm way over time now, I think. So that's it for now. And I just I go to Bible study, Bible for Food. I go to Diane's Bible studies. She does, she used Mr. Fruchtenbaum's studies, teach us. And I go to a local yokel Bible study on Zoom that I've been part of it started in 2005, small group of women. And I just go to other Bible studies galore, and I just read. I spend 2 hours with the Lord, just like I did with TM and without the Lord when in my 20s. The God has given me, always wakes me up early enough. He did that in my marriage. As soon as my husband and I decided to homeschool, and the guy said to us, if you're going to homeschool, you need to be on your knees for 2 hours every morning praying. And I said, you must be out of your mind. And then God started waking me up 2 hours before my husband even woke up, for my children. And he still does it today. Sometimes he wakes me up at 1:30 in the morning. And I just love my quiet time, and I love my studies I go to. I love learning. And the Bible has the answers for everything. Thanks, Pat. Okay. My husband left a marriage after 30 years, and he had a challenge which was finally assessed at that time called Asperger's. And it may not have anything to do with anything, but I just thought I wanted to let you know that, and I'm happy to talk to women who are contemplating divorce, because I was cavalier about my first marriage, 3.5 years, and divorced my husband. But I just did not want to divorce my husband the second time around, and he was the initiator. But anyway, I'm happy to be encouragement to people who are going through difficult marriages, too. That's it. That's all I wanted to add.